Well, good evening, everybody. If you came for the prophecy update, hopefully you're in the right spot. I have always enjoyed doing prophecy updates, still do. I don't want to suggest otherwise, but I know I've said it a number of times up here. Some of us who are, what do you call us, prophecy buffs, or what do you want to call it? People who like to follow prophecy and see what God's doing in the world, have watched over these last 30 or so years to realize that at one time, if you could see something happening once a month, you were blown away. And now, I mean, I walk around with this stack of things that I'm reading at any given point about things that are going on in the world, and you can just read the news to see the things that are going on. If you're spiritually sensitive, you know the scripture, you can see the things that are coming to pass, that are coming to pass now in the world. And I guess I need to kind of be full disclosure here tonight, and to put it this way. We're going to do a scan, kind of a scan of the things that are going on around the world, and probably not not drill down real deep into many of them. Some we will, but just to kind of, I thought it would be good to give us an overview. I think that's one of the things that the Lord is really impressing upon me, is that it's the sheer volume of stuff that's happening right now that none of us in this room have ever seen in our lifetimes. And that even those of us in this room who enjoy history and know something about, centuries worth of history or going back millennia, can't say that we've seen these things happen in the past. They are happening now. And because they're happening now, it points to the fact that we are near the edge. We're at the edge. We're at the cusp. And that, I'm not setting dates. I'm just saying that those things are happening. And so it's important for us to take a look at this. You can't talk about some of these things without mentioning politics. Please forgive me. I'm not going to, it's not my intention at all to be political in the things, that I'm going to say. Therefore, I've taken any slides that, I have. There are no pictures of, President Obama golfing or, watching football instead of being in Paris, or, but that's his business. Unfortunately, it's ours too. But politics is a part of it. There's no question about that. And politics is real and it's important. But this stuff that's going on in the world today goes far beyond politics. And so I really sense the Lord, directing to say, let's do an overview. Let's do a big wash over things. And you always have to start with Israel, because the old saying is true, that if you want to know where you are on God's clock, you have to look at Israel. And so, we'll come back to Israel a number of times, but why don't we begin there? He says, and I think a couple weeks ago I probably read this verse, but it says in Zechariah chapter 12, this is the burden of the word of the Lord against Israel. Thus says the Lord, who stretches out the heavens, who lays the foundation of the earth, who forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone, or a burdensome stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, though all nations of the earth are gathered against it. Now, look, we've all read this stuff before. We've all heard this stuff before. Think of the words that I just read, or that you just looked at. Look at that last verse there for a minute. And that's why it is important when we look at a verse, or I say, let's read this, go there, read it. One of the things that the Lord has also been impressing upon me lately is, as what we call Bible-believing Christians, who attend and worship in a Bible-believing church, in a church where we teach the Word of God, verse by verse, paragraph by paragraph, chapter by chapter. It's not just verse by verse. The idea in Scripture is line upon line, precept upon precept. The idea of learning principles. That's really important for Christians to do. Otherwise, we just get heads full of verses and words. Learning those precepts. So look at what he's saying here in verse 2. It shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all. How big is that word? 3 little letters. Means a whole lot, right? I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, even though all nations of the earth are gathered against it. Well, we're not at that point where all the nations of the earth are actually physically against the Jerusalem, but we are at that point where, for all practical purposes, all nations of the earth are withdrawing their support for Israel. Politically speaking, we could say, the United States kind of waffles back and forth, trying to, have a foot on the dock and a foot on the boat. Okay, but it's not going to last very long, right? It just can't do that. In fact, over in Joel, over to the left, he says in Joel chapter 3. Now he's speaking. This is, as far as I'm concerned, this is still a future prophecy, although I don't consider it that distant from now, from the time we're in. But he says this in chapter 3, beginning in verse 2. For behold, in those days and at that time when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, and they are back and more are coming all the time, I will also gather all nations, and I will bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat there is no valley called Jehoshaphat in Israel. Jehoshaphat means Jehovah is judge, or Jehovah will judge. That's what that word means, okay? And really this is speaking of the time of Armageddon. At least that's the way I interpret it. Some of you may interpret it differently. But he says, I will bring all those nations. I will gather all nations, and I will bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. And I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have also divided up my land. Key ideas here. That the nations of the world have sought to scatter the people of Israel, to decimate the people of Israel, and to divide up the land of Israel. Nations all over the world right now. That's why I began with Zechariah 12, because in Zechariah 12 it says, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling. I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all the nations. There's no reason, and we did do this a couple of Sundays ago. I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling. There is no reason in the world why Jerusalem would be that important to Russia, to China, to North Korea, to America, to any nation in Europe, to any place. It has no strategic value. It's a city that sits on top of a mountain 2,600 feet above sea level in Jerusalem. And with the exception of the fact that it's important to the 3 monotheistic faiths of the world, it has no value. It has no political value. And yet, though it has no political value, virtually every State Department in the world today is dealing with the issue of what will we do about Jerusalem, and where do we stand on the topic of Jerusalem, and where do we stand on the topic of the Muslims' right to East Jerusalem, and ultimately to all Jerusalem, because they won't be satisfied with only part of it. Why is that? Because God said it would be that way. But in the Joel passage, he says, all those nations divided up my land. And the nations are doing that today. They're dividing up the land. They're saying, land for peace. Give back the land that we gave you in 1948. Give back the land that the United Nations, that's multiple, that they gave you in 1948. Give it back to the Palestinians. Give it back to these people. Even though it was given to them once before, in 1948. And even though, having done that, Israel gave the Palestinians and all who lived there the right to become citizens, nevertheless, it's divided up by the nations of the world today. And God doesn't take that lightly. Now, there's a judgment coming on the world for a lot of reasons, but this is a major reason. Israel is a focal point in God's perspective and God's judgment that he brings on the world. So it's important that we bear that in mind as we walk through this. Just a few things that I think are important. I think one of the last times we did a prophecy update was in the summer. So I used to think it'd be great to do them every couple of months, but every couple of months go by so fast they feel like every week. And so, the last time we did it, I guess, was July. But at that time, Operation Protective Edge was still going on, and we were talking about Gaza and what the situation was in Gaza and this group Hamas, and Hamas has been put in its place to a certain degree, even though they're being rearmed again. But Hezbollah is on the northern border of Israel, has been there really since 03, 04, 05, and in 2006, the war with Hezbollah occurred. And Hezbollah is what a lot of people would call a client state. They're a group who took over Lebanon, a major part of Lebanon, and Syria supplies them with weapons, supplies them with all kinds of arms, and mostly Russian weapons, and also with various types of rockets. And those rockets are being supplied to Syria by Iran. So they're considered a client state. Syria is a client state of Iran. And Iran has every intention of doing everything possible to destroy Israel. Hezbollah has, at minimum, 70,000 rockets right now. I try to comprehend that number. 70,000, some would say 100,000. I remember a time when it was 10,000 and 20,000, but now 70,000, and they brag, and Mossad does not disagree. They brag that they're rockets of all types. There's no question that they have chemical weapons, chemical warheads on many of those rockets. To what degree they have nuclear warheads isn't being discussed, but they're bragging that they could start a war of any type that they wanted to. And Israel has made it quite clear that they will take care of the problem however they need to do that. What a lot of us don't realize, because we don't think about it very much, we're not in that situation where we have to think about it, but what we don't realize is that in what are now decades of Israel being forced to negotiate and to give away land in exchange for peace with their neighbors and their distant cousins, the Palestinians, who are Ishmaelites, basically. They're descendants of Ishmael and Esau. Because of that, they've had to trade land for peace, they have gotten themselves to the point where the use of, and it was pretty clear from Operation Protective Edge last summer, that to use conventional weaponry is becoming more and more difficult, and that ultimately they're being forced into a situation where they're going to have to use other types of weapons, and that idea ultimately means tactical nuclear weapons. And so as you start to look forward, I don't mean with delight, I mean as you look ahead, you understand that these are the types of weapons that Israel will probably have to use. I want to go through a few things, or in your notes, but so you have Gaza. In Gaza, you have Hamas, you have Hezbollah on the northern border, and on the southern or the southwestern border, you have Egypt. Now, Egypt's been through a big change, especially since 2011, when the Arab Spring began. Many people thought the Arab Spring, this is great. it's a people's revolution, and they're going to throw off Mubarak, and they're going to liberate themselves. And it was nothing like that at all. It was really the Muslim Brotherhood who was just creating trouble. And they got rid of Mubarak, and they brought in their strongman, who eventually was deposed, even by the military. And the General Sisi, who is now self-appointed as the president of Egypt, seems to be a nice democratic president, but don't assume that. Ultimately, he's doing what he has to do to govern his people for now. But Egypt is going to grow strong on that southwestern border. So I want you to try and picture New Jersey. Of course, in Jersey's case, you got the ocean that's sort of flipped around. But you got Israel, you've got Gaza to the west with Hamas, you've got Hezbollah to the north in Lebanon, you've got Egypt to the south, and they have their weapons, they're well armed, and much of that by the United States, and F-15s and those types of things, okay? And now ISIS already it's been discovered that there are some terror cells, ISIS cells in Israel, and they are beginning to form up on the northern border. We'll get to ISIS in a little while. I've got some pictures I want to show you, but for right now, we'll just sort of leave that alone. They have these rockets on the northern border. There have been rocket attacks on the northern border just recently, and Israel has retaliated. So there have been these skirmishes going back and forth, and it seems like it's just a question of time before that really starts to blow up. And you know that they discovered all these tunnels from Gaza into Israel last summer, and it's assumed at this point, they know that they found some tunnels. They believe that there are more tunnels up there. So it's a terrible situation to have to live in, but that's the situation in Israel now. Israel, people always quote it differently, but the numbers I always come up with are about 8.2 million people. 6.5 million of them are Jews, not necessarily religious Jews. I mean, but they're Jewish. They're at least ethnically Jewish, and the rest are an assortment of things. But most of the rest are Islamic. There's another 12 million Jews worldwide, to kind of give you a perspective on how many Jewish people there are in the world, or people who have Jewish blood in them. It's expected that in the next 5 or so years, there'll be another 3 to 5 million minimum, 3 to 5 million Jews who will make aliyah to Israel. If you're not familiar with that term aliyah, it comes from a Hebrew word that means to go up, and so when Israel was formed in 1948, they instituted the law of return, which says that any Jewish person living anywhere in the world has a right to maintain the citizenship of the country that they're presently in, but they can also then receive citizenship in Israel if they're willing to live there. And so, of course, most people have come to Israel by this mechanism, aliyah. And with the rapidly growing anti-Semitism in Europe, other places around the world, that's the reason for this growing number of people making aliyah to Israel. You think, in the middle of a war, think about that. People are making aliyah over there because they love their people. God is calling them. And in many cases, you can't even put a finger on the rationale that's being used, because we wouldn't think to do something like that. But they're being called by God. He says right here, I will call my people back from the coastlands. I will call my people who've been scattered all over the nations. I will call them back. And that's what he's doing in through this aliyah right now. All right, we're going to come to some of this other stuff later. I'd like to kind of walk through a few things. Let's see. Do we have everything good to go here? All right, let's see. It'll be a surprise. No, not that. That's a real surprise. I wasn't even planning on that one. Okay, which way do I point this? First, no, that's not where I want to go. You think I did what? That's a good place to start. Actually, wasn't there something before that? No, not that. Oh, that's a nice one. That's good too. Good. We'll get to that later. Well, that's a good place to start, actually. If you would turn to Psalm 83, there, and I know that we've talked a lot about Psalm 83 in the past, and we'll jump back to it at a few times tonight, probably. But Psalm 83, and we looked at this very briefly a couple of Sundays ago. This idea that this is a prayer by Asaph, and it's his prayer, but it's really a prophecy. It's an unanswered prayer. It never happened in the history of Israel, and you can choose to dispute that. You can choose to think, the old guy is just, it's the Old Testament. Of course, it was fulfilled. No, you can just check your history for yourself. It's never been fulfilled before, and what it gives us is a description of all of the present nations who have contiguous borders with Israel, and that together they conspire together, or better word, they confederate together to destroy Israel. It says at the end of verse 3, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. And this may just be me. So if it is, and it doesn't apply to you, laugh it off and move ahead, okay? But I think sometimes that what I have done with Scripture, and because I think I've done it, I think others do it too. It doesn't seem to directly affect me, so I discount it. Or I don't really understand all these ancient names and all that stuff, and so I hear some, bearded weirdo, saying this stuff to me, but I don't know whether that's true or not. So it's like, well, okay, get to something juicy. You can't be much juicier than this, because never in the history of Israel have all of the nations that surround it confederated together and say, let's just get it done and mop up this situation once and for all. They've never said that before. And yet here's something written really in the time of David, so like 1,000 years before Christ. We're talking 3,000 years ago. This is written, and yet the enemies are today's enemies. They're today's neighbors of Israel. And the reason, it's just part of a verse up there on the screen, but what he's saying, that's verse 4, right? Yeah. What he's saying here is that they have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, so that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. What's really interesting is that we suddenly heard about this group called, first it was called ISIL, then it was called ISIS, then it was called IS. And so the only one, there are very few people who I hear call it ISIL. But that primary one who calls it ISIL is our president. And it stands for, IS is the Islamic State, okay? Which alone is kind of scary, an Islamic State. ISIS is the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and ISIL is the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. If surely we can, okay. This is, we'll come back to this later, but this is a map that'll help us. Obviously the blue strip there is, oh, I got my little pointer, good. So this little blue thing, That's Israel, right? And this is Assyria. Assyria was, most of us don't think of how big or how long this empire dominated. You know, Babylon came out of it, was a minor city-state on the Euphrates River. It was a city-state of Assyria. But Assyria dominated the Middle East for close to 2,000 years. You know, when you read in the scripture about, in Exodus, about how after in the end of Genesis, when, you know, Jacob and his family are in Egypt, Joseph has gone there before, you know the whole story, right? And it starts off in Egypt saying that then there arose another king who knew not Joseph. He's not saying, hey, I never met you, you know, shake my hand, let's get to know each other, you know. That's not what that's about. He wanted nothing to do with knowing him. He was an entirely different kind of a king, and most historians would say he was probably an Assyrian, because the Assyrians ended up dominating that area, Egypt, for quite a long time. I mean, Israel, meaning Jacob and his family, Israel, were down there from 70 people who went down until the 3 million, roughly, who came out. That's 400 years they were down there. So Assyria, from all the way up here, also had control over this area. They dominated this area for a long time. So you have Syria, not to be confused with Assyria, okay? But this area from Syria down through that kind of pinkish area we would basically call Lebanon today. So Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and moving down into the Sinai, this strip, or you might call it a land bridge, is called the Levant, L-E-V-A-N-T, the Levant. So when this group calls itself the Islamic State of Iraq, which is here, Iraq is a part of Assyria, okay? Iraq and the Levant, okay? It's a way of saying, we're taking Israel, it's ours. And so you get a sense of a person's politics when they refer to ISIS as ISIL. That's only an opinion, do with that what you want. But so this group now has now parked itself. They're in Iraq. They're parked on the northern side of Jordan, and well, Jordan over here, Jordan, and also over here next to Israel. Their intention is to take this whole area because this group, ISIS, has a plan, and their plan is ultimately world dominion. Now, this is important that we get this. This is not politics. I'm not talking politics. This is, it's geopolitics. It's understanding the intention of the people. And there are people, even in our State Department today, and not just in this administration, even in, you know, I definitely have my preferences in terms of presidents, but even in previous administrations, there was this concept that religion plays no role in modern geopolitics. Well, that's just crazy, because clearly religion plays a major role in modern geopolitics, because this group, ISIS, wants to dominate ultimately the world, but they're going to start here. And they're well funded because they have oil reserves. They can afford the weapons, they can afford to do what they want to do, and it's their intention to dominate that entire area. Their intention is to bring in a caliphate, okay, a caliph, which is a caliph is one who's the head of everything. Al-Baghdadi is the current one, okay, but to bring in a caliphate where one rules over that whole dominion. And it's interesting that just, I think everybody probably noticed, last Thursday, King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia died. Same time, there was a takeover in the government in Yemen, which is just on the other side of, on the western border of Saudi Arabia. It's their intention, it's ISIS's intention to take that whole area. What a lot of people don't realize is that 92% of at least the younger generation of Saudi Arabia are sensitive to ISIS. They would invite them in. Without digging too deep, because I don't want to drill too far down into this, but this is a big thing that's going on in our world right now. I think a lot of us are aware that you have two major groups in Islam. You have those who are called Shiite Muslims and those who are called Sunni Muslims. And they hate each other. So Saudi Arabia has appeared to most people in the world, certainly to most people in the United States, to be our ally, and we have treated them as an ally. We have sold them weapons. We have given them weapons, and they have been sensitive to us and sold us oil. They've gone ahead of us and helped us in many situations. But they're Sunni Muslims, and they have intentions like the others do. But they appreciate our protection. Iraq, on the other hand, are Shiite Muslims, but ISIS are Sunni Muslims. So this is why you get in this very weird. If you're following it, I don't even know if you're following what I'm saying right now, but if you're following what's going on in the news right now, foreign entanglements are never a good thing for nations to get into. And we are presently in a very scary foreign entanglement. Because on the one hand, we want to fight ISIS. We want to push them back as much as possible. We have problems with what's happened in Iraq and their desire to dominate that area of the Middle East. So we've made an alliance, a stronger alliance with them in order to fight ISIS, who are these Sunni Muslims. But at the same time, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Oman, those are Sunni Muslims. So we're getting ourselves into it's a sticky wicket politically for us. So when you're talking about Hezbollah, when you're talking about Hamas, those are all Shiite Muslims as well. It's a very confusing situation, I realize, and without having a night to go through it all, I'm just trying to kind of go through the very basics so you understand a little bit of the sensitivities here. There's a how many people remember, I'm not asking if you were alive for it, because from what I can tell, I don't think anybody was, but how many people remember the First World War? Do you remember studying it maybe in high school? How did it begin? Anybody remember? Shout it out, come on. Assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, who was, he was an archduke, he wasn't a king. He was a low-level royal of Serbia. But because of all the foreign entanglements that Austria, Germany, France, Belgium, etc. had, it drew them all into this great conflagration, and it was called the Great War. Millions upon millions died in this horrifying war. I mean, okay, it was eclipsed in terms of deaths by the Second World War, but it was the worst war ever in terms of deaths in Europe, and the technology that was introduced, the gases and things like that, it was just a terrible thing. But it started like a spark on a solvent, and hit the flash point, and bam, things happen. This is what we don't. I'm sorry, I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing, but typically speaking, we all like the same kind of thing, and that's called calm. level, peaceful. We like things to move by gradualism. Level, nice. There's certain types of excitement we really don't like. But when you study history, or even some parts of our own lives, we realize that something that happens in a moment can change your life forever. Something that happens in a moment can change the world and the profile or the perspective of the world forever. And the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand was an example of that. Last week, there were two what are called, anybody familiar with the term, a black swan event? What's a black swan event? You don't see it coming. A black swan is very rare, okay? So a black swan event is something you never would have expected. Very rare for it to happen. There were two of them that happened last week. One of them is the price of crude oil. If, you know, most of us have at least been happy, right, that we're paying such low prices for our gasoline. And I sure am. I'm very happy about that. The price of crude oil has plummeted over the course of the last, really probably the last 4 months, okay? Well, Russia is a major supplier of crude oil, but they can't produce it at the price that the Saudis can, and the Saudis have such reserves that they can afford to bring those prices down. And as they bring those prices down, they can push Russia into a situation where Russia can either go out of business, okay, or they can get very desperate. Now, back in the Reagan administration, you know, when you know, up until the Reagan administration, you had this concept where you really only had two countries that had nuclear weapons, Russia and the United States, and we lived in a form of peace together. The Cold War was a form of peace because we lived by a doctrine, what was called the MAD doctrine, mutually assured destruction. You hit me, I hit you, we're both dead, why bother? Right? So that was the concept. That's not the concept anymore when you've got, you know, minimum 25 nations that have access to nuclear weapons, and more than that who have access to delivery systems. So, but at least that was the case. And the beauty of the Reagan administration and the Reagan doctrine was to grow our economy and to put so much money into our military budget that it forced Russia to, in a sense, go bankrupt. It couldn't continue to produce weapons because it had to feed its people. And so they kind of gave up at that point. And that's when, you know, through Gorbachev and this, so to speak, enlightenment that came to Russia, as a result of that, you know, we entered into a new period, new relationship with Russia. And even through Boris Yeltsin and all that was fine. But now, you know, we've got this guy Putin, who, you know, he a year ago invades Crimea and takes Ukraine, and now with the sudden drop in crude oil prices, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Bible study? I get this, okay? I get it. But the thing is that what we do sometimes is we learn the Bible, which, well, we should, but we have to attach it to what's really happening in our lives or in our world. In this case, when we're talking prophecy, we have to attach it to what's going on in the world. We can observe what's going on in the world and see how these pieces are either crashing against one another or coming together. In this case, coming together. And so a sudden drop in the price of crude oil has forced Russia into a situation where it really can't afford to sustain the momentum that it's had up until this point. That doesn't mean it won't continue, because Putin could also be very desperate and choose to take a who cares, I'll do it anyhow move. He could do that. But the other black swan event is that the euro, which is that's the dominant currency of the majority of the Western European countries, the Swiss decoupled, the euro is made up of a combination of all of these currencies, all the various currencies of Europe. The Swiss franc is a very strong currency. They decoupled themselves. They said, thank you, we're just going to hold on to the Swiss franc and we're not going to be a part of the euro, because the euro has lost a good, I don't know, I guess 45% of its value just in the last 5 years. And they said, we're not going to continue to do that and support that. And Germany, by the way, is another one who's, I'm not saying they're ready to decouple, but they're what's keeping the European Union alive and keeping the euro as a currency alive. So the Swiss franc pulled out. These are black swan events. These are events where suddenly it throws everything into a new spin and potentially into chaos. So what can happen with that? A lot of things. See, right now, we like it. I like low gas prices. Now, if I owned oil wells in Texas or Louisiana or Oklahoma, I wouldn't be happy, because I'd be closing those wells. We don't think about, does anybody own an oil well here? No, some people, okay. Principle, oil, natural resource, not making more of it, okay? There's no more dinosaurs to die and create more oil. So it's not a renewable resource per se, at least not in our lifetimes. And so it's worth more in the ground than it is at the pump. Because as people buy it and use it, what you have left in the ground rises in value because more people will need it, right? It's supply and demand, basic economics. And so that being the case, if I owned oil wells, I wouldn't be real happy. I'd be shutting my oil wells right now. In fact, if I was supplying drill bits and motors and other oil field services, I would be laying my people off right now, because the guys who own the oil wells would be shutting down their oil wells. So we like it, but this is the kind of thing that potentially could have a major effect on the American economy, which is nowhere near as healthy as a lot of people think that it is, or that it's been touted to be. What's this all about, John? Well, I'm struggling with something. I'm struggling with the fact that I can't get away from a reality. And one of those realities is that when I look at prophecy, and I'm no expert by any means, not by any means, but I'm struggling with the fact that when I look at prophecy, I don't see anything that looks like what we would call America in last days prophecy. And why is that? What causes that? Now, what I like to believe, and may well be true, is that if the rapture were to occur tonight, the number of people who are born-again believers in the United States, which is a sizable sizable percentage, would suddenly be gone. And imagine now the effect that that would have on every institution in our nation. And you can extrapolate that against some other nations. There are born-again believers in some significant nations in the world. Now, you wouldn't see that in Saudi Arabia, okay? You wouldn't see that in certain other places in the world where there aren't that many believers. So, that being the case, that would cripple, that would throw the United States into a tailspin. And it's very possible that at that point we would be dissolved, or something would happen. You might be thinking, how would we be dissolved? Well, one of the things, in fact, I remember even being taught it in Economics 101. And it's a lie. And that was, when we borrow money as a government, it's only money we owe ourselves anyhow. Well, no, you owe it. And presently, our gross national debt, right, if everybody's heard enough about it, is about $17.5 trillion. I can't wrap my brain around that number. I can't wrap my brain around that number. I could put it in exponents and I can figure out how many zeros and all that. But I really can't wrap my brain around what does that really mean. Well, the problem with that is that's really not accurate. That's cash. That's a cash problem, our cash debt. If you were to look at our long-term unfunded liabilities, entitlement programs, all of that, and you add them up, now you're closer to $200 trillion. And if I couldn't wrap my brain around 17 trillion, I'm gone at this point. But if you were to calculate gross global wealth, that's also about $200 trillion. The United States is in debt to the extent of the entire wealth of planet Earth right now. We have more debt than the entirety of planet Earth is worth. Have you ever figured out your net worth? It's not always an exciting thing to do, okay? But, you say, well, okay, I got this much in my checking account, this much in my savings account, I owe, this much to the bank for the cars and, this and that, but they're also worth this much if I sold them, the house is worth this much, and you boil it down, and if it's over zero, you're doing better than, okay? So what does that say about America? It's not a great conclusion. We have had a dominant role in the world. Here's the reason I'm going through all this. And I'm hoping that you're tracking and that I'm trying to be clear about a lot of this stuff. But in the history of the world, still, you can't find more than 2 nations that have really brought glory to God. And those 2 nations are, number 1, Israel at the height of her glory, particularly under King David, okay? And I understand they're a theocracy. It's a monarch, who's the king, but he serves the Lord God. And I understand, very different than any other system of government that we've ever seen, really, on planet Earth. But it's the truth. That's why we're gathered in a room studying the Bible and interested in prophecy. So it's the truth, and that's what Israel was and will be. And then you have the American, what people call the American experiment. But there's no question, when you go through it, and people can slice it and dice it any way they want to, but when you walk away, if you're honest, you can't deny the fact that God was behind the formation of America. And when you look at what God did with America, has done with America and through America during the course of world history, you just can't get away from it. And if you look at great empires, we are a great empire, really. When we think of empires, we think of empires in terms of ancient history, the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, and those type of things. America is an empire, and I mean that in the right sense of the word. I'm not trying to diss us, but we're an empire. If you think of Rome as an empire there in the 1st century, major empire. They had control over most of the known world at that time. And they exercised a doctrine called the Pax Romana. I know we've talked about this before, the idea of the Roman peace. It was with a spear and an iron club, okay? It's an iron peace, You keep it a peace, we break you face. But it was the Pax Romana. Well, America and our role in the world, we've instituted or helped to sustain because of our wealth and the Christian principles that we're founded on. We've been able to help to keep the Pax Americana, in a sense, around the world, not just in our own nation, but around the world. Interesting when you start to look at these parallels. And when you look at the time of Rome, even though Rome is the empire, the language that everybody spoke was instituted during the time of Alexander the Great, and it was Greek. Koine Greek, what our New Testament is written in before translated into English. That was the dominant government and a business language of their time. Just like English became the major language over these, especially this last century. All roads lead to America. I thought you said Burger King for a minute there. Yeah. All roads lead to Rome, right? That's what it said. Because Rome created a system of roads that no one else had ever created before. America was behind the formation of a system and the development of technology that fostered incredible communication around the world. You start to look at these parallels between us and Rome. During the time of Rome, the Jews had a homeland and they had a temple. Here we are at the end, and I'm sorry if that bothers you if I say that, but every empire, every civilization every nation has a lifespan, a life cycle. So here we are at the downside of the curve, and the Jews have a homeland again, and every intention of building their temple. But we're at a place where we can't sustain ourselves, really, economically anymore. Something happened back in October. It came quietly, and most people didn't even notice that it happened. China. China surpassed the American economy for the first time. No one has ever done that. They've surpassed us. We look at China. Here's a nation. Was it Napoleon who said it first? That they're a sleeping giant, but when they awake, they'll shake the world, right? China is such a huge. It's huge in every way. I mean, how many cities can you think of in the United States that have 10 million people in them? Just think through the cities, big cities. How many have 10 million people or more? How many? 1. I heard 3 somewhere. 0. Manhattan, 8.5 million. I mean, it rises, during business hours, right? All the people who come in from Jersey. But 8.5 million people. In China, you've got like 70 cities with populations over 10 million people. 1 out of every 7 container ships that leave Chinese ports every day are bound for the People's Republic of Walmart. Think about that, okay? 1 out of every 7 container ships. That gives you a sense of world trade. And so people then say, well, they got bigger than us, and they own so much of our debt. But no countries that have McDonald's ever go to war with each other. People say that kind of stuff. Don't count on this. Don't count on this idea that China doesn't have designs on the United States, especially when you look at, especially from Asia in general, but North Korea, but also China, the amount of cyber warfare that's already begun. We can very often as a nation, and our politicians too, but as individuals, be asleep and not realize that there's something growing out there. So the Middle East is the focus. When you talk about Bible prophecy, the Middle East is the focal point. There's no question about that. But the whole world is affected. And what's going on in the world right now, God uses. See, I got into a discussion with a brother who I love, deeply a few weeks ago. And I realize that some of this is semantics sometimes. But the thought was, look, God won't whack America because we live under the new covenant. And so because of the new covenant, he wouldn't do that to us. Now, he may lift his hand so that we're subject to the storms and to the realities out there that he's been protecting us from. Well, at some level, maybe that's just semantics. But why would we think that God would not cause America to suffer in some ways? And there's a lot to think. I'll just leave you with this one. God whacked his people, Israel. There's no question. He whacked them a number of times. And you know, in Luke chapter 4, Jesus says there in the synagogue in Nazareth, he says, I tell you the truth, there were many widows in Israel during the days of Elijah, but he went to none of them except to a widow in Zarephath in Sidon. And there were many lepers in Israel in the days of Elisha, but God sent him to none of them except to Naaman the Assyrian. The woman, who's this woman? This woman is a widow in Zarephath in Sidon. We would call that Philistia. Okay, it was a bigger area than what we call the Gaza Strip today. Okay, Philistia. She's a pagan. That's why they wanted to throw him off the cliff, because he says, you were suffering, but God sent his prophet to someone who wasn't even an Israelite. When God shakes his people, he uses the things that are dear to us. And the things that are dear to Americans are our freedom, our money, our comforts. Those are the things that are dear. I could go on, but that pretty well sums it up right there. That's a big basketful. And so when he shakes his people, he shakes them with the things that are dear to them. And what's interesting, what that tells me, when he says that in Nazareth, he's saying that in that area, during the days of Elijah, there were people who were God's people who were shaken. They were whacked, if you want to put it that way. They were shaken because God was bringing a judgment on them to get their attention. But there were also pagans in the area who also suffered. And by the way, we talk about something that's really very important, and we ought to talk about it more. I'm not going to do it tonight, but what we ought to talk about more is preparation. Because the storm is coming. It's already begun. And I'm not talking about a blizzard or a hurricane. Those are just samples. A storm is coming. And we know a storm is coming because the scripture tells us that a storm is coming. And yet we have a tendency to think it won't happen here. And it won't happen to us. Well, in Israel in those days, there were preppers. There were preppers. And they had prepper cities that they lived in. They didn't call them that in the scripture. They use a different term in the scripture. They're called fortified cities. Like Lachish. Have you ever heard of Lachish, the fortified city of Lachish? They were a fortified city. What does that mean? Big walls, they had food inside, and they could outlast. They could outlast an army for 3 years. Fine. Nebuchadnezzar parked his people out there for 4. I mean, you know, that's what they did. And it's a pile of rubble today. But they tried to withstand God's judgment. But God looks for repentance. He looks for change in the heart. And I realize that, you know, much of what I'm talking about tonight is not the kind of thing that a lot of us want to think about. But it's stuff that we need to think about. Fact. Sunday. 140 million Pakistanis were in darkness because the grid went down. Someone attacked the grid, the electrical grid, in Pakistan, and 140 million, I don't know what percentage that is, but that's a lot of people. 140 million people were without power. I'm not sure if they got restored yet, but they were without power. Fact, 2 years ago, 2013, 21 highly trained, very professional, I guess I'd call them terrorists, moved toward destroying a major, what do you call it, power, not a power plant, but a power, part of the grid, a power substation in San Jose, California. They were that close to getting it done before they were caught and they were taken out. I don't mean killed, but they were taken away from the scene. But think about that. They were well funded. They knew exactly what they were doing. It's been calculated that had they succeeded, that would have put, when I say San Jose, do you know what I'm talking about? Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, okay? Everything we depend on for our computers and besides China. Silicon Valley would have taken the electrical grid down and it wouldn't have been restored for at least 3 months. Process this. Just try to, I know that none of us probably, maybe there might be a few people in the room who have the ability to put numbers to that. But that's where we are, and we don't want to think about it. And what's sad to say, but it's the truth, is that our government's not doing much about it. So, and I could give you more facts as far as electrical attacks on other grids around the world. But it's something that's happening. People are realizing this is an area where we can attack. Fact, I couldn't get the map, so I couldn't show it to you, but there are minimum of 22, and I hope you believe me when I say this, but if you don't, just please look it up for yourself, okay? But there are a minimum right now of 22 Islamic terror training camps in these here lower 48. Fact. I've told my sister, but she says, they're nice, everything's fine. But in Saylorsburg, that's not far from here. That's less than 2 hours away. It's in the Poconos. Saylorsburg, PA, high walls with barbed wire that faces out. That means they don't want you in, okay? High walls with barbed wire that faces out. And no one has said it's a terror training camp, but it's a don't come in here camp, unless you're a Muslim. Fact. The United States has already brought many Muslims in from the Middle East, giving them free transportation. And there are mosques in places like Jonesboro, Arkansas. I never knew there were Muslims in Jonesboro, Arkansas. There weren't Muslims in Jonesboro, Arkansas until they were planted in Jonesboro, Arkansas. There are 75,000 Syrian refugees on their way in right now, and they're being sent to North Dakota, which that's just kind of odd to me, but North Dakota, and I mean in groups of like 5,000 and 10,000 across the Midwest. Our government is helping this. Well, maybe that's because our government's blind to religion and religious war. But in the midst of all of this, here's what's happening, and I want us to see it before we close. In what's behind me here is a picture of what this psalm that you've turned to, Psalm 83, it speaks of all of these nations that are around Israel. He says, do not keep silent, O God. Do not hold your peace, and do not be still, O God. For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people, that's Israel, and consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. So this is a group of people. They have one desire, and that's to destroy Israel, that the name of Israel would be remembered no more. Completely wipe the map, right? Verse 5, for they have consulted together with one consent. I know right now it probably feels easier just to look at me because I'm reading, but read this for yourself later on. And do not, I'm hungry. Don't take my word for this. Acts 17:11 applies. You have to read the word with readiness of heart, right? That's what the Bereans did. They received it with readiness of heart. But they searched the scriptures to see if these things are really true. So if you hold a Bible in your lap, you're responsible to receive it with readiness of heart. This is God's word. Now, is it true? Is what I'm telling you true? Don't take my word for it. Search it out. But don't discard it because you don't like it. That's the corollary to that principle. He says, verse 5, they've consulted together with one consent. They form a confederacy against who? You, against God himself. Because everything we're about to see is that each one of those nations is united by two things. Number one, they share a border with Israel. They have contiguous border with Israel. It's like Jersey and Pennsylvania. Second, they're all Muslim. They're all Muslim. So, yeah, they want to wipe out Israel, but they have taken a pact. They've entered into a pact, into a confederacy against God's people, but against God. They've consulted together with one consent, formed a confederacy against you, against Jehovah God. Why? Because what do they all say? Allahu Akbar. Allah, He is greater. That's what that means. Allah is not God. People tell us that all the time. Just another word for God. No, it's not. It's the name for the moon god from the Arabian Peninsula. And Muhammad, says this is the God we worship. It's a pagan god. He's Satan. Make no mistake. I'm not politically correct. This is not a politically correct statement to make. But Allah is a pagan deity. Therefore, He is Satan. And it's the greatest conflict in the world today is between the people of Allah and the people of Jehovah God. Who are you? Right? So whoever you are, if you're part of the people of Jehovah God, the people of Allah hate you. Because we're the people of the book. And they'll take the Jews on Saturday and they'll take the Christians on Sunday. That's the mantra, so to speak. Okay, borrowing that idiom. But they formed a confederacy against God himself. That's what this says. That's never happened in the history of Israel. You say that over and over, John. I know, because we need to get it over and over and let it flow through our blood and understand these are the days we live in, because look at what's happening. They say, the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, which sounds like, Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs, okay? But very few people even remember him. What was that, Woolly Bully? Did they sing that? Okay. They form a confederacy against you. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites. Okay, well, so what is that? Well, so you have Ammon, Moab, Edom, okay? Edom are the descendants of Esau, Jacob and Esau. They're the southernmost in what we would call Jordan today. And the Ishmaelites, now they're kind of in a lot of places, but a lot of the Ishmaelites are actually up in Gaza today. They're basically Ishmaelite in their bloodline, but they're also some of them out here. They blended in with Edom. So the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab, and the Hagarites. So Moab is the next one up. Hagar is mostly considered to be from Lower Sinai. So Hagar, Hagarites, the descendants of Hagar. Okay. Gabal, Ammon, and Amalek. So Gabal is considered to be up here. Amalek is in this area, the northern part of the Sinai. Was it Moab? Yeah, Moab. Ammon is the next one up. Philistia, we would consider, certainly the Gaza Strip, it actually goes up all this way in ancient times. But the Gaza Strip you would definitely call Philistia today. The Philistines were from there. Assyria, as they used to be, so that includes Syria and that includes Iraq, has joined in with them. They have helped the children of Lot. And who are the children of Lot? Moab and Ammon. Okay? Ben Ami, son of my father, and Moab from father. So those are the descendants of Lot, actually grandchildren. And deal with them as with Midian. We just went through that in the story of Gideon, right? Deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera. I mean, now we're talking about the upper part. Midian is the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia. This is a major area that comes down like this peninsula. Deal with them as you did with Midian and Sisera, as with Jabin and the brook of Kishon, who perished at Endor, who became as refuse on the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, and all their princes like Zeba and Zalmunna, who said, let us take for ourselves the pastures of God for a possession. God didn't dig that, did he? So he raised up Gideon and said, you're going to go in there, O mighty warrior, and you're going to take them out. He was outnumbered, but God gave them the victory. And that's the prayer here. That's the prayer of Asaph, that God will do that. And he will. He's going to do that. He said, oh my God, make them like the whirling dust, like the chaff before the wind. As the fire burns the woods, as the flame sets the mountains on fire, so pursue them with your tempest and frighten them with your storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be confounded, dismayed forever. Put them to shame and perish, that they may know that you, whose name alone is Jehovah, are most high over all the earth. Look, that has never happened. But what unites all these people, remember, two things, but I left out the third. Two things: they all have a contiguous border with Israel. They're all Muslim, and ISIS is now coming in and probably will be or may well be the confederating force that'll do that. Do you realize what contemporary times we're living in? I mean, contemporary, biblical, prophetically contemporary. Time's always contemporary. But I heard you giggling. We're in such prophetically contemporary times. This is all ready to happen. And Ezekiel 38 and 39, that's an entirely different war. And then not one of these nations is mentioned in the prophecy in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And not one of those nations in Ezekiel 38 and 39 share a border with Israel. They're entirely different. Israel is at a point right now, and we're going to end here, okay? But think about this. If ISIS comes in like a flood, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Israel's allies would have come to her aid. Today, I can almost predict for you what the advice from the State Department would be. They might even send James Taylor over to sing for them. You've got a friend, but we won't be there, right? But the State Department will say measured response, proportional response. But Israel's to the point where they're told they've spat in our face. That's what they're being told by America, who has historically been their ally. And I can see Israel today saying, so what do we have to lose? We have to survive. And The IDF has been preparing for this. Not that they've been reading Psalm 83, but they've been preparing for a war on every side, on every front. And it will be terrible, and it will be bloody. Process this one for a minute, though. What will the destruction of those nations be to Islam? I mean, it won't destroy Islam, but imagine the impact that it'll have. But don't forget this. Islam will come back again in the war of Magog, Gog and Magog, the Magog invasion. They're all Islamic as they come in to take their spoil. And in the process, ISIS is making its way toward Mecca. Their desire is Mecca. And they could set up their caliph in Mecca, for that matter. And it may well be, and I'll leave it here and I won't explain it unless we talk about it privately later on, but it may well be that, and some of you are sensitive to this, it may well be that Antichrist, that great world leader, will end up being something different, or someone different than many of us have been told over the years. Will really end up being an Assyrian, not someone out of Rome or someone out of Europe proper. And as you do your homework biblically, you'll start to become more sensitive to that and realize that that may well happen. And in the process, and probably in that Psalm 83 war, there's a city that's going to be destroyed, and it's not Jerusalem, it's Damascus. It'll be destroyed in one day, and its walls will burn with fire. It says, Isaiah 17:1, it'll be destroyed in one day. Jeremiah in 49, it talks about the destruction of Damascus, and also talks about another destruction over in Elam, the southern part of Iran. We can talk about that some other time. These are the days we live in. So what do? Is the Antichrist alive today? I believe with all my heart that Satan has his man, and he's ready. And I believe with all my heart that he's always had to have his man ready. Because in the days of Antiochus Epiphanes, right, when Antiochus Epiphanes, 165 BC, he was considered Antichrist. So there had to be one ready. And maybe it was him. And Caligula was considered to be Antichrist by many of the early Christians. And maybe he was, until he was defeated. Because Satan doesn't know the time. Jesus said, Mark chapter 13, he said, no one knows the day or the hour, not the angels in heaven, not even the Son of Man. Well, if Jesus didn't know, I think he has a better idea now, but if he didn't know then, neither did Satan. So he's always had to have someone ready. Hitler, many people thought he was Antichrist. He was, and had it not been for a couple of strategic battles, he would have had world dominion, and we'd be speaking German. And so Satan always has to have that Antichrist ready. But it seems that we're living in the day when we're going to see these things come to pass. And as much as I am absolutely, completely, I believe with all my heart, pre-trib in my rapture eschatology, that we will be taken out of here before God's judgment falls on planet Earth. Don't ever think for a moment that we too may not go through very difficult times before that. So those things that we hold on so tightly to, and we all do, we have to start loosening our grip to some of those comforts and realize that it's about Jesus. And it's about the people we love knowing Jesus. Because he's coming back. And he's coming to take us out of here. And we want to be found faithful in doing the work that he's called us to do. There's a zillion things we could talk about. We're way out of time. So why don't we stand and pray, Lord, okay? Father, we thank you, Lord, for the time we've had, the things we've discussed. There's a lot that's going on in this world, Lord. We know that we're here in the midst of the blood moons, Lord. 2 have come, 2 more are coming. And the fact that they fall on these feast days, the fact that they involve Israel and Jerusalem specifically, Lord, that tells us, and we can try to deny it, but it tells us that you mean business and you're sending a sign to your people Israel and your people the church. May we not be asleep, but awake and ready, Lord, to live your word, to live the way you've called us to live, to be the men and women of Jesus Christ that you've called us to be. Lord, to study your word and to be the soldiers of Christ, Lord, that you've called us to be, with a heart to speak the truth in love and not to be afraid, because we have your Spirit, we have your word, and you've called us, Lord, to wear our armor, Lord. May we be diligent to consciously wear our armor, Lord, prepared for the battle ahead. We love you and we thank you, Lord, for all that you're doing in our lives and that you desire to do. And especially, Lord, that one day we will be with you forever. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thanks all.